And we are live.
Welcome,
With
welcome. Hello.
would like to point out that Eric has been compromised. Fang Fang got to him.
Oh no.
Um, he has been aggressively compromised as well. We might add.
Yeah.
You could say she got her fangs into you.
Yeah. They don't know who that is yet, though. We haven't told them.
But you know what, Eric? You know what we have told them already.
What have we told them already?
We've told them that aliens are real, that they exist, and that there are four different types of aliens that have visited Earth. And you laughed at me last week.
I did.
You actively
This
laughed
was
at me last
hold on, this
week.
was 2 weeks ago. This was
Two
two
weeks
weeks
ago.
ago.
Okay. You laughed at
You
me
keep
2 weeks
track of
ago.
time. You want me to believe you about aliens?
And we now have reports from a high level official within the Israeli government that we are, in fact, part of a galactic federation. And that the only reason we don't know about aliens is because we're not ready for them. Okay? Because they are a protectorate, damn it. Which also, by the way, sorry debaters out there that might be listening, none of your nuclear war impacts are going to work anymore because the aliens will save us.
Hmm. Well, I thought superconductors did that too.
Probably.
Tech innovation and superconductors did that.
Very likely.
So here's the basic gist of the story, as Nick has described it, is correct. A retired general and current professor in Israel named
Very reasoned individual, say.
uh, named Haim Eshed. That's my
So you'll butcher Jewish name, not
yeah.
other name. Got you.
Wait, which names didn't I butcher? I feel like I butchered every name I've said.
Well, in previous instances, you were unwilling to even try at certain names.
I felt like this was
Um,
doable. I felt like this one was doable.
well, I have to let you know it was not, apparently.
Okay. Okay. Well, I apologize. You want to correct me?
No, you're good. Keep going.
So he's a former professor. He was the head of Israel's space program for 30 years, three-time recipient of the Israeli Security War Award, and says that we have been dealing with aliens for years and that these are not immigrants, but that they are a galactic federation. Um, he is now 87 years old, and he
And
gave
is
a
not suffering at all from dementia or Parkinson's or any other disease. They're now going to besmirch this good man's name with. Because next week, I can guarantee you there's going to be 3 articles. The dude has Parkinson's or something. It's ableist for one, people to do that. And second, it's nonsense. He's just telling us the truth, unlike
I think
everyone
it's
else.
look, I think it's ableist to like dismiss him on the grounds that he's, elderly and like potentially has a problem like Parkinson's or something like that. But I do think
I've
that
already
like,
seen that article, by the way. That's the only
oh
reason
really?
why I'm pointing it out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, someone basically was trying to make the claim that he has Parkinson's disease, and I was like, let's hold on a second, because I've known a lot of people that have had Parkinson's disease
Yeah, but
over the years. That
that's
doesn't,
not gonna do it. Now, if
yeah.
he had like dementia or something like that, that's a different story.
And I mean, these are all terrible, debilitating diseases. It doesn't, none of it makes you make stuff up, though. That's
Right.
the problem, right?
But like
Like, not understanding things or getting things confused, sure.
people
You
also
don't
get
get aliens confused.
I don't know. People get weird ideas as they get older. Look at Rudy, who we will be talking about later, by the way. Because like Rudy used to be a respectable lawyer. And in
Rudy was
his
possibly one of the greatest mayors of New York. Like when it comes to like his, like when it comes to
9/11
like,
response,
huh?
his 9/11 response.
Just 9/11 response, but also just like you look at a lot of the statistics of New York, right? Like crime rates, things of that sort. They all drastically reduced during the Rudy Giuliani uh, mayoral time period, right? So like
He
now, did he do that in really screwed up ways? Possibly. I don't actually know. It was so long. I was like a kid, right? So like I don't know. Maybe he did in really screwed up ways. But like you look at the history books look very fondly on Rudy Giuliani's time in New York. Let's put it that way.
I think his AG his being AG of New York is more impressive than anything he did as mayor, with maybe the exception of his 9/11 response because of like what a monumental national tragedy that was. But I think that like the point that we need to get at here is that number one, it's like pretty shitty to just like write this dude off because he's old, because that is just completely dismissive of everything else. At the same time, that is a factor that needs to be considered. Maybe this dude just got some wild. Maybe he's got some wild fucking ideas. Totally
Or
possible.
maybe he's old enough now that the threat of violence no longer works on him.
Totally plausible. Totally plausible. I don't know. You don't know.
Because if you were trying to keep secret a galactic federation and you had scientists and individuals working with them, the only way you could keep people's mouths shut is by threatening to murder them. So he's just not scared of that anymore. He's like, come at me, bro.
Okay. So apparently Trump, according to this dude, Trump is aware of these, the Galactic Federation. And
he's president, of course he is.
And Trump was on the verge of disclosing their existence, but the Federation stopped him. This makes me think of that episode of, is it Next Generation or Voyager? I think it's Next Generation, where they have to go down to that planet and they have to like completely maintain secrecy and like live among them.
You're literally describing like the first rule of Starfleet. Like you cannot disturb. So like that's true of all Starfleet.
This one is like it's an espionage thing where they're actively like participating at the highest levels of government to like espionage people from finding out about them because they're still a pre-warp civilization, but the government somehow found out.
Yeah, I'm trying to get my camera to stop defocalizing, but it doesn't seem to be working.
He's focalizing a word.
It might be. I may have just made a new word.
Yeah, who cares? Linguistics is descriptive, not prescriptive.
And more importantly, words are just social constructs. So if I socially construct a new word, then it is a word.
That's what linguistic descriptive is.
Yeah, I know, but you're a weird English person.
Okay, whatever. You're a weird poli-sci person, so.
History, sir.
History.
History and philosophy.
History and philosophy is better than poli-sci.
Poli-sci majors are for losers.
Yeah, I agree. I was having one of our consult this year. I was having a conversation with him about poli-sci majors, and
was neither. He one?
Huh?
Was he one?
No, he's an English major like me. I
respect English majors. You'll have to read a lot, much like history majors.
We get to read fun stuff, though.
I mean, did you get to read about CIA and the Third World and pirates in your coursework? I sure did.
In my coursework, no, but I did in my own time because I'm a weirdo.
I didn't have to. I got an A in that class. Boom.
Did you get to read weird Argentinian postmodernist writers that like?
Let's put it this way. I wouldn't, even if they had wanted me to.
So anyway,
now that we're done bastardizing each other's degrees,
I didn't even mean to. I much love for history and philosophy. I love anything in the humanities is okay by me.
Anything in the humanities.
So it is, according to this argument, according to this article from Jerusalem Post that I'm reading.
Very reputable source, I'm sure.
Oh, well.
Not Zionist at all.
Well, I don't think Zionism factors into their reporting on the potential existence of aliens.
Well, maybe it does.
I mean, it could possibly, but until proven otherwise, it's...
I mean, if you were a highly religious organization, wouldn't you have a vested interest in making sure aliens weren't proven to exist? Wouldn't that cause some problems for your religion?
Wouldn't the Jerusalem Post even be reporting on this if that was the case? Like they could just choose.
They have to discredit this guy.
They're not saying anything to discredit this guy. They just said it's unclear. So they just said that it's unclear if any evidence exists to support his claims. But it did come just ahead of a recent announcement by Space IL, which is the group that is behind Israel's failed attempt to land a spacecraft on the moon in 2019. It's not enough that they're colonizing Gaza. They got to
To be
colonize
fair, I want to be very clear. They are the Galactic Federation of Light, official name. And so, all right. So, other than I want this to be true, as someone who knows the UFO world a little bit, this is not new information. This is regurgitated information that's existed for like 40 years. So everything that he's basically said is just like straight up reading a blog post from something in 1980, right? Like, or 1990. This is not like, so the only thing that gave it any validity is the fact of what his position is, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so his position. So either A, UFOologists have been getting it right for 30 years. And this has been well-known factors that we've known for a very, very long time in the UFO community. Or B, some point, he just fell for a rabbit hole.
Yeah, and right? And I think that like if there are instances of like NASA astronauts who, as they've gotten older, have kind of, you know, looking back on their experiences, have grabbed on to like weirder things. Like weird things, and they've connected that with stuff that like people in the UFO community have told them. And so it's quite possible that this guy just, you know, picked up on a weird idea.
Well, so like just to be clear, right? Like this is if you're not a UFOologist, it's referred to as the Pleiadian myth, is what he's basically telling everybody about, right? So it's that there's this large federation of aliens that exist out in the universe, led by the Pleiadians.
Typically out in the
and they're basically global, universal police persons that just make sure that lower civilizations don't murder themselves, right? And so, like, they wait until you get to the stage in which your development is sufficient that their integration of their technology wouldn't destroy your civilization, and so. The idea, this is that same idea that you've heard people make this claim before, that we've been slowly introduced to alien technology over time. That's what explains exponential growth in things like computing and other processes like that, where we went from, like, you know, 1950s and 60s, it would take an entire room for a couple megabytes, to now you can have, you know, hundreds of gigabytes in a stick about this big, you know what I mean? That exponential computing growth was possibly pushed by aliens, or that some technological growth such as stealth technology were pushed by aliens. A lot of this stuff has been heavily discredited, right, over the years. Like, you know, scientists going, hey, F you, aliens didn't create that, I did, you a-hole, right? Like, you know, when you say stealth technology was created by aliens, well, you're now saying some scientist who worked his ass off to create that, right, or team of scientists worked their ass off to create that, weren't capable of creating that, right? So it's kind of like stealing people's thunder. And a lot of times those people will come out and be like, actually, we produced it. And, right, you know, there's now scientific papers on some of that stealth technology from the early stealth technology, right? But this is a well-known myth. I feel kind of bad for this guy, because I do think that he's probably just, you know, I think it's just overloaded information. I don't think there's anything wrong with him. I just think that he believed something, and then he started to take small bits of information that he had and place them out of context from one another, that he would have, but that we wouldn't have. Like, but there's also just like so much tech transfer between the U.S. and Israel that I would assume that sometimes in the last 30 or 40 years, right, we've transferred technology to Israel that is so sufficiently better than the technology that they currently had that it looked like it couldn't possibly be U.S. military hardware.
Yeah, I mean, Israel is developed. I mean, I just got done. I was telling Nick before the show, I just got done watching there's a series on Netflix called The Spy with Sacha Baron Cohen. It's about sort of a Mossad agent going into Syria in the 60s. And you look at some of the technology that they had around the time, and it keep in mind, Israel was a state that was founded in the 1940s. And then really only developed during the post-war period as the United States tried to, develop strong international relations in the region in order to hold up pillars of oil production in Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran until the 1979 revolution. And so it's important to keep in mind that like a lot of this, specifically Israel, developed very rapidly under tech exchanges between the U.S. and Britain. But you mentioned that like you didn't think there was anything wrong with them. I don't think that there is either. But even if there is, like, it's not that like that's anything that isn't going to happen to the rest of us at some point. Like, cognitive faculties do decline, and
So I also would just like to point out, like, so we don't know how this person came about this information, right? So for instance, right, like it may very well be algorithmic, the reason why he came to believe these sorts of things, because if you start to believe these sorts of things or you start to look into them, then you will be your internet will force you down rabbit holes, right? Like that's the whole purpose of like engagement metrics, right? So it could have been something as simple as this dude, like, someone's like, hey, Grandpa, look at this cool video about aliens. Isn't this ridiculous? Then he looked at it and some of the information was like a little bit off, but he could like draw conclusions to it. Like, oh, okay, maybe they're getting this wrong. But then he just kept going and going and going. Who knows?
Sure.
Maybe he's been going on that rabbit hole for 4 or 5 years and now he believes it, right?
He's had what's currently happening with me and Yugoslavian synth music.
You admit these things. That's the most embarrassing part. Like, you admit this stuff.
It's good.
It's like, other people are like, what's your dirty secret music? And Eric's just like, hey, do you want to know the super weird stuff I'm listening to right now?
I love the secret weird stuff, man. Everyone should wear their secret weird stuff on their sleeve.
Wear their secret weird stuff on their sleeve.
The world would be so much more interesting if people were weird in public.
Don't worry about it, Eric. You're always weird in public, buddy.
I know. All right. I don't have anything else on the Galactic Federation story. I think that it's interesting, and I'm inclined to believe that maybe it's a dude who's like, getting high on his own intelligence community's supply, maybe.
Never get high on your own supply.
But it's silly, and it's fun, and we can joke about it, and Nick can say I told you so, and
it's true, I did.
All right, what are we talking about next?
I wish I had a more reputable source, though. We're talking about your girlfriend.
Oh, my girlfriend. Okay, so I have never met this woman, actually, because she has not been in the U.S. since 2015.
Eric was compromised. Don't let him lie to you. All of his belief systems have been changed by the Chinese Communist Party.
Yep, that explains why I'm the way I am. I'm a Chinese intelligence agent.
A true Maoist.
They MK Ultra'd me.
MK Ultra'd you.
Okay, so this is really interesting, and this is like an older thing. This isn't happening right now, but a bunch of articles are coming out about this right now, because as all of these sort of election security and sort of like shoring up, like stopping foreign interference discussions are happening at the congressional level, a lot of this sort of the ways in which Congress people and state level politicians are vulnerable to being compromised by foreign intelligence agents is kind of coming to light from the intelligence community. And this story is, let me find the section in the article where they talk about it. So a woman named Fang Fang, or Christine Fang, as she went by when interacting with U.S. politicians, because
interacting,
yeah. But she went by Christine Fang, and she was tied to a bunch of local mayoral campaigns. She had connections to people like Eric Swalwell and
Oh, don't leave out the other two.
yeah, who's the woman that you like? The Tulsi Gabbard.
Tulsi
Tulsi
Gabbard and
Gabbard
AOC.
and Ro Khanna, who I've spoken favorably of. The intelligence community believes that like she's had contact with all of these different campaigns and politicians. There's a few others in here. Just to name off a few people that they have pictures of in this article I'm looking at. Fremont Mayor Bill Harrison, Representative Judy Shu, Representative Mike Honda, former Representative Mike Honda, San Jose City Council member Ash Carla, just a lot of people at like sort of like the local and state level that she's had connections with. And in 2015, as she was being as sort of her program was being surveilled and investigated.
What did that consider?
She fled the country, and she has not come back since then. So she enrolled as a student at a Bay Area university, and then attended a bunch of political gatherings, civic society conferences, campaign rallies, campus events, in order to connect with elected officials and other prominent figures. And basically, they believe that she was overseeing a group of likely unwitting subagents who she helped place in local and political and congressional offices. She attended regional conferences for U.S. mayors. She engaged in sexual or romantic relationships with at least 2 mayors of Midwestern cities over a period of about 3 years.
Yeah, she did.
At least 2 separate sexual interactions. This article is really going home on like her sexual activities. Like this lady sounds badass, honestly. Like
I've seen the movie Red Sparrow.
She's like a female James Bond.
Pretty much. I mean,
except she's
China
sleeping.
should give her a medal.
She's sleeping.
Except for China's not going to give her a medal because she got caught.
I don't know. Well, she didn't get compromised. Like there's a difference between having your cover blown and being compromised.
Yeah, but she got
So they focus a lot on the sex. She volunteered for Ro Khanna's unsuccessful 2014 bid. Remember, she left in 2015, so Ro won his seat in 2016. The Khanna campaign has denied any Khanna's office said that he remembers seeing Fang at several Indian American political gatherings, but did not have further contact with her. Basically the same thing for the Tulsi Gabbard campaign. She was a fundraiser for them, and Gabbard has denied knowing who the woman is. No recollection of ever meeting or talking with her, according to her. Fremont City Council member Raj Salwan, whose name appears on the flyer, told Axios that he was unaware of Fang's role in the event, and her name was added to the flyer by other Asian American leaders. Shu's office says they have no records of Christine Fang. And basically, they think that she was here to gather political intelligence and raise influence among U.S. officials, play the long game, and hopefully get some of these people into higher offices and be able to push them to positions that are amenable to China on relevant issues, probably relating to trade and international relations and data exchange and stuff like that.
So I'm hearing that there was a political Asian James Bond came to America, seduced all our mayors,
2,
and got all of the information, and now we're going to lose the war to China.
I don't know about that. Honestly, all of this is really unclear as to how successful she was, or what like the long-term goal even was. It seems to be more of a cultivate a network. And the Soviets did this really well during the Cold War, by the way.
Soviets suck at this in comparison to the Americans, but continue.
That's not what the CIA people say in their memoirs, that like the Soviets were far ahead on this, because think about it, like the KGB had, and the NKVD and all these other organizations, they had to exist like internally beforehand to stave off internal problems ahead of time. And they just exported that model that they used and refined it over time. Whereas the US was being taught what they needed to know by the British during World War II.
Oh, okay. You're talking way older than I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. We're
Right.
talking towards the end of the war.
I'm talking. I'm talking like true Cold War era, right? Like the U.S. had caught up, right? Like, and there's some crazy stuff we did. But continue. I want to hear your bit about the Russians and what they were doing.
My point was just that they played a very long game where they got people into positions and then didn't use them for a very long time. China, I think, is probably even more adept at this because they are the Chinese Communist Party has played things especially in recent years, with the long game in mind. And so I think that this is like, she didn't even really get that much. I think it's more of a influence campaign more than anything else.
The real question is, how many more are there?
Yeah, I don't know.
Right?
There's a lot of reports. The intelligence community is very concerned about, college campuses and how susceptible they are to Chinese agents who come there either as students or as foreign professors. And I think that that's, from an intelligence perspective, that's potentially a valid concern. However, I also think that it opens the doors for a lot of racialized surveillance that is probably not okay. That is definitely not okay.
Let me tell you why the Americans are better at this than everybody else. Because the Americans and the American CIA, particularly during the period of MK Ultra, not only was able to do this, but also was able to turn agents through suggestion and through other forms of aggressive manipulation. Because we didn't stop at play on human weakness. We had a tendency to create it. Right? Like people, I understand people are like, well, MK Ultra, like everybody tries to pretend like it was just a domestic policy or just something we did domestically. Like that was the training ground, right? The idea that the US military and CIA didn't use these sorts of mind altering substances on people when they needed to persuade them to do certain things in certain places is, one, we know from white papers and from unclassified documents, is false. So I'll give you, for instance, there was a case that we studied in one of our courses from I think it was 1977 in Nicaragua. And by that time, we had screwed up Nicaragua pretty bad by then, right? And one of the things that we somehow got, one of the members of the cabinet of the largest opposition party in the entire country, is shot in a board meeting. And shot and killed in the middle of a board meeting. The person who shot and killed him then turns the weapon on themselves, kills themselves before any kind of interaction can occur, right? Basically, all the evidence indicates that we brainwashed this individual to do that.
Yeah, but I don't even think you mentioned like creating human weakness. I don't even think we necessarily need to do that. You need to go so far as using mind altering substances on them. You literally take somebody out, get them drunk, and then have
what you want is information. You're right. Right?
No, I'm not even saying like get them drunk to get their information. I'm saying like get them drunk, have something terrible happen, and then help them, cover up the bad thing, and then
like they manufacture an accident.
Right, exactly. Like they kill a hooker or something like that, and now they need their friends' help to cover it up, and you don't need a mind altering substance to do that. Although some of the MK Ultra stuff is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like the happenstance of getting individuals to do things that they don't even know they're doing, is something that somehow the CIA gained access to, right? And that's crazy,
right? And with this particular
this is
story,
not that kind of spying.
No, this is very much a slow burn, very, very, very early stages, if that, of like developing a network that's mostly there for like benign information gathering and maybe very soft pushes for information. Like this is the sort of stuff that we're concerned about. Like it also doesn't seem like she's being all that careful either. Like if we're being perfectly honest.
So I think that largely the discussion of like what is China's plans, et cetera, like we'll never really know that because I don't think that there will ever be a sufficient playbook from China when it comes to the spying portion of it. I'm not talking about the economics, which they have a pretty strong grasp on, right? Unless something drastically bad happens in China, or we develop it and world altering technology in the next 30 or 40 years, right? We're not going to stay ahead of them economically, right? But when it comes to other things, right, like I don't know, spying and those sorts of things, they haven't been fighting a Cold War for, 80 years, right? The reason the US and Russia are so damn good at this, the reason Israel's so damn good at this, is because the existence of those nations has basically been predicated on, right,
Cold War.
Their Cold War mentalities, right? So
I think it's a little bit less the specific Cold War mentality and more just like being surrounded by countries that are, relatively hostile to your existence.
You mean that have on 2 separate occasions attempted to wipe your civilization off the earth?
Yeah, that one.
Oh, well.
But also Israel is a nation that's founded on nationalist zeal to reclaim something that when you yourself are fleeing from nationalist violence, and then in response has spurred on a nationalist backlash against your nationalist government. So
stuff happens. So, but like, so long game, right? I sort of agree with you, right? Like, I don't think that there's a particularly damaging long game. And I think that the idea is that our intelligence community is always concerned about any information, right? This is why they're so concerned about Huawei. This is why they're so concerned about these other Chinese telecommunication corporations, or why we're not allowing Chinese components within our 5G connectors in the United States, why we push very hard for 5G connectors in Europe, during the Obama administration, pushed really hard for 5G connectors in Europe to not be integrated with Chinese technology because we feared backdoors and things of that sort. Mm-hmm. But to put this out there and to be kind of clear with this is that we're not so like people aren't the target.
It's infrastructure,
right? And it's also big data is what they care about. They don't care about little data, right? They care about, like, if China, if you could say, hey, China, you'll know nothing about the politics of the United States other than what you can garner from all of this metadata, they'd take it in a heartbeat. Because what they want is they want metadata. They want to know routines.
I feel like, but here's my pushback on what you're saying. I don't disagree that is what they want. But the framing, and maybe this is an unintentional framing, is that it's not that big a deal because they're not after people's individual data. That's the same logic that the NSA used to justify, X keystroke and all these
I'm just making a non-unique argument.
Okay, gotcha.
Right? The question is, who has the data? We already know the NSA already has all this data. Right? The reason our intelligence infrastructure doesn't want China to have it is because currently the United States has an asymmetric data control. Right? Because I can guarantee you we have access to China's data. Right? It's not like the Chinese firewall is the largest internet joke in the world. If you've ever met anybody who's been behind it before, like they get a VPN and then woof, everything's fine, right? Like, and the thing is, like, people, having known so I'll give you for instance, right? I used to play a game called EVE Online. At one point in time, the Chinese before VPNs, they had to create 2 servers, right? A world server and a Chinese server, because it had to be behind the firewall, right? Everyone who used to play the Chinese server no longer plays the Chinese server and now plays the world server.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about tens of thousands, 15, 20, 30, 40,000 Chinese nationals are VPNing to play a video game in another country, right? So all of their data has been accessed.
I had a long distance relationship with the Chinese foreign exchange student that was here for a year or so when I was in college, and didn't last, but like we were able to talk over Facebook and other apps despite it being banned in China.
Yeah, because they just use a VPN and access all, right?
Also, I realize that synergizes really well with the accusation that I am a compromised Chinese asset.
You clearly are a compromised
Yep.
Maoist.
I don't even know how much like the Xi Jinping follows follows Maoism to the letter. Like he's done a lot to update like party thinking.
I don't really care to talk internal Chinese politics, right? Although if we ever do want to talk about China internal politics, I have some friends.
That would be a cool conversation to have. I'd rather have people who know more about it than we do, because
largely though, I just think that like we have that data because Chinese nationals give it to us by escaping the Chinese firewall, right? Like if you're using a VPN service, right, like your data is encrypted. If you think that the NSA and other organizations haven't broken those sorts of data encryption models that are being developed by small software developers, you're kidding yourself, because they have, right? And it also, a lot of that data isn't actually encrypted once it hits a server. So it encrypts to server, hits that server, pings off that server, encrypts off that server. But the data is still there on that server. And so like the idea that in the intercommunication between the US and the EU and the UK when it comes to internet traffic and things of that sort makes all of those forms of internet traffic almost immutable from one another. So we can't hide our traffic from Europe. Europe can't hide their traffic from us because the interconnections of the systems. And because of that, like all of these, we have that data. We have the big data on China. We have the big data on India. We have the big data on everybody. The NSA knows everything metadata knowable about everyone that has metadata that's knowable about them, right? The reason they fear Chinese influence in these ways is because it brick by brick cuts back on their information advantage.
Well, this is very much like this isn't even getting into like systems intelligence, like what you're discussing. This is very much human intelligence, like old school Cold War type stuff, which
it's so inefficient in comparison to the type of information technology that you can
inefficient but useful for pushing like particular agendas or for
you could see it as like perhaps the real plan isn't like any kind of real information gathering, but was rather an attempt to cultivate enough individuals that would support certain Chinese business license in certain places in the country so that they could get a foothold in places that they don't have now, so that they might be able to link up to the infrastructure to later one day down the road gain access to some more metadata than they
also just like if if you have somebody who is a friend in politics, you can and that they because one of the things that this article talks about that I had pulled up is it talks about like wanting personal information about things like habit, like the intelligence community being concerned about like them collecting information on individuals' habits, on preferences and things like that. And that seems to be really more of a like, if we wanted to push on this person, what could we use? Like that's the sort of, which I get it, like having hard internet data would be useful for that. But with the sort of metadata collection that you're looking at, it's harder to disaggregate that person from the whole network of communications. Whereas if you just like have somebody who's on the ground who's networking with these people who's around them, like, yes, it's inefficient, but it humanizes it. It feels more organic to them. I can see the appeal.
I think the other counter argument to what I said is they have like 3 billion people.
Yeah.
So what's inefficient to an American spy isn't inefficient to a Chinese spy because they could have 10, 15 times the number of spies. Right? Like, and I don't mean spies in the traditional sense of what we're talking about. I mean fangs, right? There could be hundreds of fangs all throughout the United States right now doing very, very similar things.
Yeah,
right?
This is probably look, this lady probably did not have the game plan right?
Yeah.
Like they're not out telling Fang Fang what to do. Or like how to do it. They've probably given her she probably has a very simple directive, like, hey, go, meet these politicians, hang out, help their campaigns. We want you to talk to this person today. We want you to do this. And there's no it's a theme we've talked about before, where when you look at it piece by piece, it looks like there's no method.
Well, yeah, because you just give directive. Right, like so it's like directive intelligence versus other forms of intelligence, right? It's not like so. Have you ever watched the show The Americans?
No.
Okay, so the
Is that the one with the Russian sleeper cell
yeah,
that
yeah.
okay.
So the one portion about that episode that's wrong is the idea that they had handlers. So like within the whole mythos of the thing is that there's very particular handlers with very particular details they give them and tell them to go do particular things. That's bullshit. That's not how the Russians would have operated situation. That's not how they did operate situations like that. They instead gave them directives. Right?
Yeah, the whole having a handler is a very American and British thing.
Handlers are not Russian, right? Russians didn't have handlers in this sense, right? But one of the things that we know certain sleeper cells like this did do in the United States was gain access to information. They would have information drop spots, but they did not communicate with other Russians. Purpose, right? You would never want to communicate with someone with even the minusculest tie to Russia. They'd worked so hard to create the backstories of these people, right? They had Americanized their English accent. They had spent years and years and years and years and years learning about American culture, right?
I think a better way to think about the Russian intelligence gathering system versus the American and British and Israeli intelligence gathering system is this. The US and Israel, they have people who are posted up as a sort of handling location, a sort of managing location that directs a bunch of agents that go out, do something, come back. Go out, do something, come back. Whereas with the Russian system, it's more of the agent is the handler and sets up their own intelligence network.
We know of Russian networks that were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people wide, that individuals who were giving intelligence to Russians were 3 and 4 steps removed from the actual intelligence gatherer. Right? So it's just they created vines that came back to them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so an American politician might be very interested in a particular set of things. The reason he's interested in it is because a businessman says that he's interested in it. And the reason that businessman says he's interested in it is because some stockbroker said if we could figure out what would go on here, we could make a lot of money. The reason that person said that is because a spy fed them information that said that that would be true and gave them papers that were doctored in a way to make it look like that would be true, so that that person could gain the intelligence they actually wanted down the road. Mm-hmm. Right? And this is something that we saw within Russian spying networks, but also American spying networks, to be fair as well. The Americans did have some
I'm oversimplifying with the whole handler, they go out, they have a set location, they go out, they come back, they go bumblebees.
What I want to say is that this smells of general directive. Your directive is to get us integrated into as many political systems as you possibly can. Work your way up, help people become successful, make sure they're ingratiated to you, never cross anyone. Right? Don't ever make a political enemy. Right? It's probably the goal. Sorry, I'm having.
You're good. You're good. I think the point is that this is an interesting story because it's an interesting look into sort of the different kind. This is a look into sort of contemporary intelligence operations that are happening from other countries. I don't think that this is anything to be worried about. This is not anything any human person should be stressed about.
It's not nearly as worrying as the last 2 things we're going to talk about. But
yeah, that's much more impactful to your daily life than this. And it has much more of that large metadata, mass intelligence gathering feel that should feel scary.
Agreed. So let's go from intelligence to stupidity. Um, so for those of you that don't know, the AG Ken Paxton, right?
AG of Texas, sir.
AG of Texas, Ken Paxton, filed a lawsuit in federal courts uh, against 4 states. I'll let you guess which ones. That decided the election against his homeboy Trump. Because like Americans voted and their votes actually got counted. And when their votes got counted, Biden had more than Trump, oddly enough. So let's go over the simplistic response to this. A state does not have standing to sue another state over election results. There is no precedent that says that they do. And they can't claim to be an aggrieved party. Only a citizen of one of those states could. Or a nominee could. So, Eric, why is Ken doing this?
So I think that there are 2 reads on this. I know which one I am persuaded by, and I think you'll probably agree with me. Number one, the one that I am not persuaded by, is that Paxton is a Trump ideologue, that he is just super persuaded that the Trump train is the way to go, and that is the future of American politics, and that he needs to be all on board with it. That might be true insofar as like his beliefs. He might very well believe that, but I don't think that that is the motivating reason that he is doing this. I suspect that this has to do with the corruption investigation into Ken Paxton and the inevitable court proceedings that will be happening, where he will be in big old trouble. And this is sort of a way to get at the to signal that he's a good boy and that he deserves a pardon. And because I mean, there's tons of reports that Trump might just start randomly pardoning people. That's what I think is happening. I think Paxton is trying to secure a pardon from Trump.
He also just might be trying to get the FBI off his ass. Because,
well, that's not going to distract them.
hey, Ken, they're coming for you, buddy. Yeah, they're coming for you.
Once you get the
they're the best investigative arm in the United States. So good luck. Because they want you to go to jail.
You're going to jail, buddy.
By investigative arm, I mean like they even make up evidence. So,
well, that's not cops in general. That's cops in general.
Oh, but I mean like the FBI invented the playbook.
Yeah, I know.
Every playbook cops think they're running by. I mean, the FBI was doing that in the 60s. You know what I mean? Like that stuff's been done.
J. Edgar Hoover is an interesting individual.
J. Edgar Hoover might be the most evil individual in American politics.
Most evil individual in the history of American politics. I tend to think so. There's also like, so you remember when we learned about, like we were in high school and we learned about the McCarthy, the Black Book in Hollywood and stuff like that.
McCarthyism.
There was a pink list as well. Did you know this? And the pink list is basically a bunch of people in Washington who are accused of being homosexuals. And what's really interesting is that there's been a lot of evidence that J. Edgar Hoover's sexuality was not exactly.
He had a male secretary for 60 years that lived with him.
Yeah.
That's all you really need to know.
Yeah. He's not exactly, he's not the as straight as he wanted to play it. And it's so interesting to me that it's one of those instances of like a person trying so hard not to be found out that they're gay, that
bad read, but okay.
They ruin hundreds of people's lives in order to kind of like keep their own. I don't know. This is why like internalized heteronormativity is bad. Because it's just like, how can you hate yourself so much? Like
I don't think you have the right read on this one. I think everybody knew J. Edgar Hoover is gay. That's not the question. How the hell are you going to go after Hoover?
That's a
He
good
would
point.
bury everyone in Washington. He went after.
That's a good point. That's a good point. I guess
I
my
mean,
thing
he
is that, like,
purposefully kept large numbers and files on everyone in Washington.
mhm,
Why? Because if somebody came after him, he was
you get
not only going to take that person down, but he was going to take everyone who ever thought about supporting that person down. And he did regularly, right? Like,
yes,
so,
but also I disagree that I think that everybody knew he was gay. I think he had plausible deniability. And he had plausible deniability with enough power to be able to say, like, hey, don't push any further on that question. But it's just it's interesting to me because, like, even like other people who participated in these as like witnesses and things like that were pushing, were outing people and stuff like that. And then you look at like the anti-gay pastors and stuff like that. Like, this is a documented pattern of behavior that people who are like super publicly homophobic have, where it turns out that, sometime down the line it comes out that they themselves are homosexual. And like it's mind-boggling to me. I've never understood that impulse.
maybe it's the same impulse that creates Candace Owens.
Yeah, that's a different dynamic probably, but very similar.
I mean, sort of, right? She just isn't the leader of the FBI, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that also the leader of an FBI in a time period in which the FBI was kind of, let loose to do whatever the hell they wanted, right? Largely because of J. Edgar Hoover.
Yeah.
But,
Fuck.
regardless of all of this, I think that I don't know. I think the call is that, like, the dog whistle. Please pardon me, Mr. Trump, because if you don't, I'm gonna spend the rest of my life in jail, likely. Because I think that one of the things we're going to see from the Biden administration, one of the easy wins for the Biden administration, is going to be the prosecution of corruption.
Mhm.
Active, aggressive prosecution of corrupt politicians. And they're going to hit Dems too, by the way. I'm just going to point that out to you. They're going to take out a few Dems in the process just to kind of make it seem like they're not just headshotting
So
Republicans.
here's a really interesting question, because I agree with you. I think that they will go after Dems. I think that this whole like articles, like, because they've known that Swalwell and Ro Khanna and all these people are in on it too. How much of this do you think they like try to use as a way of attacking like lefty candidates?
Lefty candidates.
Or how much like do you think that the attention like goes further on them, or the like things
I
get
think
blown?
they. So I think they actually use it to knock out prominent members of the Democratic Party that are older, right? Because then it looks like you're actually weeding corruption, right? If you hit somebody that's been in Congress for 20 years, right, but that you've always had problems with, I th- I think it's gonna be super racist. I think they're gonna go after the Black Caucus
I think that's probably fair.
because
I
there
can see
is
like,
corruption. There's corruption within the Black Caucus, right? Corruption in every one of the caucuses, but there is some corruption in the Black Caucus. I think they're going to go after some of these prominent names in the Black Caucus, and they're going to try to take them out. And they don't have to worry about civil rights leaders sitting there going, "Oh, really? You're going to, huh? Huh? Let me talk to my entire, you know, program, right?" Because honestly, I don't think that there is the same kind of loyalty to the Black Caucus that there's been in the past. And I also think that Democrats have hated the Black Caucus for a very long time, especially white centrist Democrats, right? Black Caucus has been the only thing pushing the progressive for a very, very long time, right? Why not take out the civil right, the not
Get
no longer civil rights leaders, right? That's the
get
key,
rid of that. Get rid of that head of the wing of the that head of the Hydra, if you will.
right? Because then they can just call the other ones little kitties that don't know what's going on, right?
Mhm.
Because they'll be first and second term congresspersons, which means that they'll have no reason to give them appointments to important seats, right? Because they're such young congresspersons. Then they can just fill all of their congressional seats with, true blue, white Dems, right? And nobody can criticize them because, look, we weeded out corruption in our party and in the Republican Party. And they're going to go after all of the ones that you would expect them to go after with the Republican Party. Like it's going to be everybody you would suspect. They're going to go at them all, right? So,
which to be fair, I'm inclined to believe that like there's probably you go fishing over in that side of the pond, you're going to find stuff.
Just go look at the governor's races of most states, and you'll find plenty of corruption, right? Like within the governor, lieutenant governor, AG departments of states, all throughout the United States, you're going to find a lot of corruption, right? But the problem for, I mean, the crazy thing is like, there's no way Ken wins, right? Like in this process, unless Trump pardons him.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he doesn't, he just made himself a target.
Yeah.
He may have already been that target, but like, you know, when they're looking down the list of special prosecutors to place, they're like, these are our best 10. They're like, which one should we put in Paxton? Previously, they would have put like their 7th best guy on Ken Paxton. That's gonna be like their 3rd or 4th best. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna be like, or girl, right? We're gonna really get this guy, right? Like we're gonna put him in the ground. And so if he doesn't get a pardon, it was a poor decision.
Yeah. So this is a cry for help. Please pardon me, Daddy. I need help. I need help.
So I've said this before, but people really don't understand this. A president cannot carte blanche pardon someone. They have to pardon them for a specific action, right?
Yes.
So if I go into the street and shoot somebody in the head, the president can pardon me for shooting someone in the head. Okay, he can do that legally. He cannot pardon me for having shot someone 5 years ago, unless he actually pardons me for that. So any pardon Trump would have to put out would have to specifically enumerate the guilt of the party who is pardoned.
Right. And I think that's the problem with any of these that a lot of people aren't seeing in the short term is that like if they're done with so little information and done so on the fly,
and you're not going to get the FBI.
There are still prosecutable cases against these people and investigations that can happen. Like even if Trump pardons himself, he probably doesn't know what all he is accused of.
Well, he also probably doesn't know all of the laws he's broken.
Right, exactly.
Right? Like, I mean, legalistic systems are purposefully obscure, right? Like,
but I think we're getting too far. I think we're getting too far into the weeds on this for the theme of this week's episode, which is very silly and speculative. So my question to you is, who else gets the Trump pardons?
No one. I don't think Trump pardons anyone. I think he walks out of the White House as 0, other than Cohen.
Okay.
I think he pardoned Cohen because Cohen kept him in the office.
I think that's fair.
Right.
I don't know that he doesn't pardon anybody.
I don't think he pardons anybody.
I honestly don't know, and I don't.
If I was gonna bet on one person he might pardon, it'd be Rudy. And there must be something Rudy really did wrong.
I think Trump has dirt on Rudy. I don't think he'll pardon the guy who there's no like he doesn't strike me as that much of a sycophant that he just like start acting like a complete dumbass like the way Rudy has.
Well, we did talk about how when people get old, sometimes they lose their faculty.
Sometimes, but also like to kind of be on the other side of this as you were for our former Israeli general.
I just don't know if Rudy was ever actually ethical is the question.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that Trump knows things and he has Rudy under his thumb. And I think that if he ever were to pardon Rudy, he'd be giving up that power that he has over him.
Unless he knew and or believed and or saw that there was already a case waiting for Rudy and that leverage would already be destroyed. But honestly, if you're the FBI right now, there are no cases open, Mr. President. We don't have any cases open on anyone right now.
Keeping it real quiet. I'm sure.
I don't have anything. We don't have any reason to believe anybody's done anything illegal in the entirety of the United States.
Is Chris Wray still the FBI director?
Actually, no.
I'm sure if he is, I'm 100% sure he does not like Trump.
Yeah, Christopher Wray is.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain he does not like Trump very much. And I'm fairly confident that like other people within the intelligence community don't like Trump very much, and that they're waiting for him to leave office so that they can open a whole bunch of stuff at the directive of President Joe Biden.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% certain that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, of the agencies that one owe the Democrats one is that Comey stuff, right? And two have been burnt brutally by doing that because of how fucked they've been in the Trump administration. I mean, has there been an administration that has gone through more FBI directors than Trump?
I don't know. I legitimately don't know.
Like, I don't either, but like it feels like that's an excess. Like, I'm used to like one FBI director for two presidents.
I think Obama had a new one midway through his term, or it was Bush. Bush Jr. did.
Yeah, but I mean, like, they typically stay the same, right? Like, you don't typically change. It's not like a cabinet position.
Right.
You don't typically change your CIA director. You don't typically change your FBI director, right? You don't typically change the NSA director.
Hold on, let's
Those
look.
tend to be the people.
Let's look, because I think one of the recent A&M presidents was the FBI director. Either that or they were the CIA director. I don't remember.
Okay, so let's see. Robert Mueller was the FBI director from 2001 to 2013. Mueller became the FBI director 7 days before 9/11 and stopped being the FBI director on September 4th, 2013. You then had Comey for 4 years, and then you had McCabe, and then you had Wray.
He's gone through three in one 4-year period.
Now, to be fair, though, I don't think you actually count McCabe because he was only ever acting. So we do have another instance of that happening in 2001. From June 25th, 2001 to September 4th, 2001.
And then you have
Pickard.
1993 to 1993, Floyd Clark.
Yeah, so actings tend to only be there for a little bit of time until they find
Johnny Otto. Going back a little further. Wow.
So it's very common for there to be an acting director that doesn't become the director. That's very common. So I don't think we count McCabe against him. So he had two. He fired Comey.
Yeah.
Right. You don't generally fire FBI directors, but okay.
Yeah. And by the way, the A&M person must have been a CIA director because they are not on this list. Let me actually pull that up because I'm interested now. It's my alma mater. I want to know.
You went to A&M?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's fucking worst. The whole campus is beige.
Woo!
Gig 'em. Let's see. Peter Ghost, Michael Hayden, Leon Panetta, David Petraeus, Michael Mall, John Brennan, Mike Pompeo, Gina Haspel.
My favorite kind of email. This message has been rejected due to a blank subject line. Fuck. All right. But regardless, my statement remains the case. It is very rare for that many FBI directors to exist in that period. Also, like, the fact that there has been an active and aggressive attempt to besmirch a former FBI director, you could not piss the FBI off.
Yeah.
Going after Mueller was the death sentence to a lot of Republicans that are corrupt. It wasn't even their fault, right? Like, it was actively Trump's fault that he went after Mueller the way that he did, right? But you just pissed off the FBI and let them stew for 4 years. Imagine what they're going to do, right? Like, they're vindictive, right? Like, let's not pretend. So I don't think. So short answer, I don't think hardly anybody gets a pardon from Trump. I don't think that he actually gives a shit about other people, and he lets them all burn.
Yeah, Okay. I think we've probably exhausted our ability to discuss that intelligently. My question is, we have Facebook antitrust up next, but do we want to end with good news or bad news?
Those are both bad news.
What, Facebook antitrust legislation is bad news?
Yeah, because it's not going to pass.
Mm, I don't know about that.
Let's end with scaring people to death so that they can't go to sleep tonight.
Okay. All right. So why do you think that Facebook antitrust legislation is not going to pass?
Because Congress has consistently shown an inability to legislate tech companies.
This is fair. However, historical example, they had also historically failed to do it to oil companies until they did it.
Okay. Here's the other problem with that statement. How is Facebook trust?
They own Instagram and they own WhatsApp. And the argument that is being made legally is that
those should be three separate companies.
Yes.
I agree. I understand that. But if you look at their marketplace, it is not the United States. It is a world market.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we can't just compare their choices within the United States. We also have to compare it against other applications around the world. Now, we in theory don't have to, right? We could just only look at U.S. models. But then Facebook has a very compelling argument in the court system, which would be that we're actually not a monopoly. You just banned our competitors, i.e. Chinese companies that we don't want to have access to our technology, into our infrastructure, into our individual data, i.e. the government doesn't want to have that access to. The Facebook's argument could very easily be, yes, obviously we're the biggest and we're the strongest and we're the best, right? But the only reason why we have a monopoly in the United States has nothing to do with our actions, but has to do with American actions. We've always been competing with Chinese companies.
So I don't disagree with you. I think that if this were Congress that was having to do it, that they would probably be ineffective. But as it stands, it is not Congress that is doing this. It is the Federal Trade Commission filing a lawsuit, and another lawsuit.
Yeah, no, that was my response, though, was that in a court of law, their argument is going to be that the FTC is the one creating a monopoly, not Facebook.
That's
They're
fair.
going to make the argument that the FTC banning large numbers of other applications that are social networking applications, specifically ones that are from China, right, are the reasons why Facebook is a monopoly. So you can't blame us for being a monopoly if you kill off all of our competition.
Right. I guess I think that I think another argument against this is that we just lost a whole bunch of people to Parler, a whole bunch of people, but they'll read that as an argument that look, Parler exists and a whole bunch of our conservative people left because they didn't like the platform.
Well, they're also going to argue Twitter exists. They're also going to argue Snapchat exists, right? They're also going to argue TikTok exists, right? They're going to argue all of those are social media platforms. Are they Facebook? No, they're not, right? Those platforms are totally different than Facebook. But Facebook is going to argue all of those are social media platforms, unless they don't have a monopoly, right? They are not a trust. Now, the better question is, can we file a better lawsuit against? I think the better lawsuits against Facebook are about aggregated data. They're not about trust, right?
I think that there is an element of this that has to do with
because you can make the argument that there are only 3 entities in the United States that have sufficient computing control to be considered a monopoly. And those companies would be Facebook, Google, and Amazon, right? They're the only ones who, and Amazon because of, not Amazon, Apple, right? And Apple largely because of their connections and interrelationship with Amazon services.
So
right?
here is kind of like a counter argument for I haven't found the part of the article where it talks about these Cambridge Analytica stuff that's probably going to get brought up in these, and there's going to be intelligence community concerns and stuff like that. That's all going to come up in this. But a counter argument on the subject that we're on that gets brought up in this is in a press conference, one of the FTC people, or excuse me, this is someone from the New York AG's office. they say that by using its vast troves of data and money, Facebook has squashed or hindered what the company perceived to be potential threats. I think that that's a claim that you could evidence in a court of law that doesn't necessarily rely on FTC that the FTC like regulation argument doesn't necessarily apply to.
They're going to argue that it's feature contribution.
Right?
Because like the argument is going to be like the reason they bought Instagram is because of stories.
Mm-hmm.
They don't buy Instagram, they couldn't have Facebook stories. It would be a violation of intellectual property, right? They're going to argue the same thing with WhatsApp, that WhatsApp gave them the ability to integrate extremely powerful communication platforms within Facebook itself, right? Because the Messenger app uses the same technology now that WhatsApp does, right? And if you ever used the Messenger app before they bought WhatsApp, it was trash in comparison to what it is now, right? So their argument is going to be that that's technology, that they didn't buy those companies because they were threats. Because let's be honest, Facebook could have killed WhatsApp. Mm-hmm. Facebook could have killed Instagram. They purchased them because they were technologies that were useful to the Facebook brand.
I think also those are higher profile examples, and like I don't have access to this information. I don't really follow what Facebook does. I don't care that much. I mean, I care in like big picture, but like in terms of like, Facebook, acquired this company or bought out this patent or whatever, mm-hmm. I can maybe see them, I'm sure there are examples of them buying some like small tech startup operated out of some kid's garage because they don't want to compete with it. Like, I'm sure there are examples of that, and I'm sure that that'll get used, and I'm sure that they'll use these sort of like feature integration arguments and things like that. They'll find, some bullshit reason or whatever. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I could see this working. I could see it not working. Facebook has pissed off a lot of very powerful people.
But the other thing that they're going to do, right, is like they're also going to point out all of the other things they've bought that are portfolio buys that didn't get integrated into Facebook that aren't competitors with Facebook. To make the argument that some of these things that people are saying are to kill competition are actually just portfolio buys. Right? So for instance, Oculus VR is owned mm-hmm. by Facebook, right? So if you've used an Oculus, I think they're called the Oculus Rift system, the VR goggles, right?
I've never used one.
Huh?
I've never used one, but
if you have, they were an independent company that is now owned by Facebook. Same thing, I think the HTC Vive or whatever was bought by Amazon, right? So they're competing now, right? And there are two major corporations that are competing over the development of that new technology. Now, do I think that in 10, 15 years from now, if VR technology overcomes a lot of the issues that are currently associated with VR technology, that we won't be looking through a computer screen at one another with a camera on our heads, but instead we'll maybe be in a virtual reality talking to one another? Very possible.
That was kind of the dream of the 80s. And like, I get the technology's a lot better now, but like, that's always kind of been on the edge of the technology. That's always been the dream.
Right. I just think the technology is totally in a different class now than it used to be. Now, there's other problems now, and they're actually physiological problems.
You could say that same statement in the 90s relevant to the 80s, and it would make sense.
Right, but if we compare the 80s to 2020 when it comes to video technology, we have totally different worlds.
No, sure. I don't disagree with you, but my point is just that like it's hard to say like, because there's an ephemeral element to this too. That's not just like there's also like an everyday functionality of it. Like, do I really want to have to like, get up to hang out with you and to have a conversation? Or
that assumes it's a get up though, right? Like that assumes it's actually any more difficult or obtruse than a pair of glasses.
I mean, I guess, but like, as long as it's easier for me to like, get on my phone and just FaceTime or hop on my computer and get on a Zoom call. I think that's what most people are going to do. I think a lot of the impediments to this are lifestyle and convenience type things.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we weren't really talking about VR. We were talking about Facebook.
But here's my example though. If all you got to do is put on LaForge goggles, you're instantly in. We're all wearing LaForge.
I don't know. I thought people said Google Glasses were going to be the next big
I mean, maybe, I don't know.
years
Might be,
ago.
right?
That was
But
like a long time ago though, and they never really caught on.
the problem with Google Glass is they look ridiculous. And
Yeah.
you're supposed to walk around with them everywhere. That's the other problem with them, right? Like, if Google Glass looked like a pair of Oakleys, people would walk around with them.
Yeah.
They look like trash. Is the problem, right? Like, 'cause some tech geek is creating them instead of a designer.
We can have a whole conversation about the future of VR, but I think that takes us into other realms that
So
we're not.
I don't think that an antitrust lawsuit is going to work against Facebook.
Okay. I am more agnostic. I think that they definitely have arguments against it, but I also think that Facebook has pissed off a lot of powerful people. I think that the bigger threat comes from a somewhat more competent administrative branch and a Congress that, while it doesn't agree on a lot, does agree that tech companies are not awesome most of the time. And that being something that could potentially unite Democrats and Republicans to actually get done.
Maybe. We'll see.
It that really all depends on like internal dynamics of Congress and stuff like that, and what else happens.
We'll see. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that there's enough resolve to get this done, right?
And I think that's a fair opinion.
And I think it's because you got a lot of old boomers in there that don't really know what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's not, I mean, I understand they didn't grow up with it, right? Like, this is a modern technological issue, right? And the only people who really understand what's going on in this are going to be living in, Austin and San Francisco and, in these major tech companies. And what I want to point out is a lot of people who no longer work in those tech companies are the ones that are pulling the alarm, right, about them. And I think that those are the people we should probably start listening to, right, are the people that are pulling those alarms.
Speaking of tech companies in Austin, do you know who just moved to Texas?
Yeah, our boy. Your favorite person in the entire world.
He can be yours. He's not mine.
No, he's yours.
Oh, I don't want him.
He names his children odd things.
Yeah.
With his Canadian artist girlfriend.
Yeah.
He's still getting grants from the Canadian government.
Never really got into her music.
Has anybody?
I don't know, actually.
Okay.
I've never met anybody.
Feels like a Paris Hilton kind of thing.
Yeah,
you have enough money, you can just kind of do whatever you want.
I've never met anybody that's super into her music.
Neither have I. Maybe it's a Canadian thing.
Possibly.
Okay.
I don't know anything about it.
Anything about it? All right, fair enough. The owner, SpaceX and Tesla, lives in.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting dynamic that's going to happen over the next 10 years with California, where there's going to be a large exodus of tech companies as California pushes to regulate them more. And I wonder what that does money-wise and reaction-wise against the government in California. Like what is the cultural reaction? Oh, my computer's about to die. What is the cultural reaction within California when the mass exodus of tech companies starts?
I mean, it's not going to be good, but we already see the mass exodus of people from California.
Not people, tech companies.
I know, but we're talking about people who move businesses, right? Like, so we already see this going on right now in the status quo. I don't know. I think that I don't really know how California runs, right? So to me, trying to identify how California will interact with something is largely beyond my understanding, because not Californian, only ever been to California twice. Was fun both times, but I ain't building a house there either because it's too darn expensive. So I don't know. I mean, the California economy is clearly going to suffer from that discussion, right? And I just don't think Silicon Valley moves, right? I think that the giants stay put, right? I don't think you're going to see Google and Facebook and those companies really moving, right? They'll still be there. Um, but you might. Who knows? It would be. I mean, like they've built such. They just will build more campuses and spread out more. So they'll diffuse some of that wealth out of California, but I don't think they'll get rid of it. I mean, like it also doesn't understand that like computer infrastructure and computer security and things like that. Like computer security is a huge industry in San Antonio, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a military base there,
Mm-hmm.
right, which has a lot of infosec stuff going on there, right? There's a lot of businesses that are in San Antonio.
There's actually two.
There's two military bases in San Antonio,
Yeah, there's Lachlan, and then there's also Randolph.
and I believe Lachlan is the one that has a lot of the computer
That
security stuff going on there.
that's correct. Randolph is closer to where I grew up. It's very much like just an airfield, whereas Lachlan is more of the like hush hush, you know, lots of security.
Okay.
It's lots of security.
Yeah. So, actually, I think my girlfriend was stationed in one of those two bases. But neither here nor there. But people don't realize that, right? Like, so there already are major tech firms in Texas, in San Antonio, in Austin. There have always been massive telecommunications corporations in Dallas, Texas, right? Houston also has a huge, thriving tech community within it. Now, they tend to be more parsed out. So it tends to be like security firms tend to be in San Antonio. I don't know why that is, right? Maybe it's because
Oil,
that's what those
like stuff that works with the oil industries in Houston.
right. But I think that might just be because of that military base over there. There's probably a lot of talent that comes from that base, leaves that base, and still lives in San Antonio. You know what I mean? And it's a lot easier to recruit somebody out of the military if you're like, hey, you don't even have to move. You'll be, minutes away from the base you used to work for.
Right. And if you're doing stuff for oil and gas companies and you're just doing like, either IT operations or software development for them, it's better to be near the corporate office than it is near the actual refinement processors, because you don't ever need to physically go there. You just need to go to the people who are going to be buying those products.
I mean, there are like 3 or 4 major buildings in downtown Houston that are owned by major oil companies. No one in them.
Mm-hmm.
0 people work in those buildings.
Yeah, it's the London model of property ownership, where you're literally just buying it as an investment to hold.
No. These are buildings that are considered growth buildings. So the idea is they have a building already, and they recognize that their growth reaction, like the overhead around the plants, is so great and has grown so quickly over the past 10, 15 years that as soon as oil prices respike, right, they're going to need more space. So they're pre-buying space out so they don't have to compete with other companies later on down the road to buy that space. So they just bought the space. They bought the land and built it. Is what they did, right? But there are, I think, 5 or 6 major buildings that are just like these huge, vast buildings, fully furnished with no one who works in them. It looks kind of creepy, I mean, like,
yeah.
But I think that it would take. So the one thing California has going for it that Texas and other places don't have is almost all of the major computing banks, like server banks in the United States, are in California. Western United States is completely served by California web banks, right? There are some in Texas, there are some in Dallas. I'm not going to lie about that. There are definitely some in Dallas, some in Kansas City, right? There's some in St. Louis.
Isn't there also like an NSA?
There's NSA places at all of these places.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's just like a bootlegger they put right in the middle, and it connects to all the server. No, it's not that obvious, honestly.
No, it's its own separate building.
Huh?
It's its own separate building.
Yeah, its own separate building. It just, might have a cord that runs into that other building. You don't know.
They're the big black buildings. Like,
no,
they look really
not.
No,
they're the completely undescript gray buildings that no one ever wants to look at. You're about to pull up a picture of a black building to disprove my thesis.
So I was wrong about the one in Dallas. It is not black. It's just ugly and gray. And
That's
in
what I'm
fact,
saying.
the article is a Dallas Morning News article complaining about how ugly it is.
If you're gonna build an NSA building, at least make it look pretty. You know what I'm saying? Like, it should
Yeah.
look like you're high tech spying on me if you're high tech spying on me in it. No, I mean that's how the NSA has built their entire mantra, right? Like they're totally indescript. You never know where they are, right? They don't put NSA on the top of their buildings, right? They don't.
Oh, the black building I'm thinking about is actually NSA headquarters. That's why.
Which also, by the way, does not show up in Google image search.
Really? Because I'm looking at pictures of it right now.
Sorry, it doesn't show. If you try to zoom in on where it's supposed to be on Google Maps, it doesn't show up for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. Like you couldn't Google Earth it either.
There's a building shaped like a fingerprint that came up when I looked at this, and I don't know that that's real. Like I kind of refuse to believe that that's a real building that somebody built. But then again, the Sagrada Familia exists, and
fair enough. So Facebook antitrust. Meh, maybe not.
Maybe not. I don't know.
But what we do know is happening right now is that major tech firms are actively tracking our data, and are creating new ways in which they do this.
Not even that they are tracking their data. They're developing tools to give your managers a method of tracking your productivity and assigning you a productivity score. This is particularly within Microsoft 365, which my campus uses.
Yep. Which includes Teams, right? Which is the most important portion of that, right? Teams, Outlook, Microsoft Word, those sorts of things. Although, please come at me with these new technologies. I'm going to break them. I'm going to be the most productive person they've ever seen. It will ignore the fact that I send the same email to myself every 5.5 minutes. So, we'll see how smart your algorithm is, Microsoft.
Yeah, I am curious as to how effective this is and like how it works to collect this data. Like, is it because if it's just like you have these programs open, or are you actively typing in them? Or
so one of the articles I read said that it would track like the number of emails you had sent. It would track things like the amount of time you had spent in face calls. So, for instance, like we're teachers, right? You're supposed to teach bell to bell. Right? If Eric
we are not actually.
Okay. Well, let's say you were, right? So let's say Eric, let's say the school district you work for, which is nondescript and we're not going to describe, right? Said we want you to teach exactly from 9 to 10 a.m. every day. And you log onto your computer at 9:03 to start your class and you end it at 9:45, the software would track that. So then they could create your principal at the end of the month could create a big list and, probably won't get mad at you for doing that one time, right, Eric? That's probably not the problem, right? Let's say you habitually do this, right? Mm-hmm. They'll get a data back that shows you're an outlier. Data.
Oh, no. I'm an outlier.
And you...
Summary execution. Take him out behind the gym.
You're supposed to have 1,500 minutes and you have 1,334.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look,
but they don't want to do this, especially in schools, because then PEA could actually track student attendance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not worried about them using this on teachers, to be honest.
No, I think it's a classic A-type manager want, right? Like this was that micromanaging a-hole that works in an office over you.
Yeah, this is not
to make sure you're doing your job, right? This is the same type of people who in the late 90s were the ones advocating for putting the same technology they use in libraries to make sure you're not looking at porn, right? On their computers to monitor their employees, right? Like these are...
They do that in schools.
Yes, they do. No, for sure, right? Like I'm not saying they don't. Like that's how I know that technology exists, right? And to some degree, like if you're in a computer lab, right? I have caught many a student watching things they should not be watching on computers in a computer lab, okay? But like in computer labs, for instance, it's very common, right? The main computer lab computer will pop open. There'll be 30 images on your screen. It'll be all the desktops. You can click on one, see what they're doing, just make sure all the kids are doing their work. But treating adults like they're children, probably not a smart move for a company.
Yeah, I don't know. They've been doing that in education for a long time. I think that the reason they don't want to do it is for the same reason that you've said. It's for accountability reasons. And anybody who does try to do it is just kind of stupid. They're going to stop doing it very quickly because they're going to,
Lose millions of dollars.
yeah, yeah. I think this won't last very long. This is probably more of a threat for people who work in more conventional office settings,
It's a
where
reaction to people not being able to look over your shoulder. That's the answer to the question. It's a reaction to your boss no longer being able to look over your shoulder because you work from home. Period.
this is even worse than that because it's like,
Just a better tool for it.
yeah, but it also assumes that, it because this forces you into working a certain way. And I don't know about you, but like I am a person who I like to handwrite things.
Sure.
I like note taking, like I like hand notes. I generally speaking, if I'm having to like write something or like take detailed notes on something, I do a handwritten draft and then I put it in my computer to make it look nice. I still use my computer a lot, but I like working by hand. And I know that a lot of older colleagues, still keep like manual grade books and things like
Oh,
that.
those poor souls.
Eh, it's whatever your preference is.
Yeah, I don't know. I
I keep
hate.
I keep an Excel sheet that is easier,
Hmm, well,
but I think that this is just like this forces you into working a particular way. This isn't just a matter of like being surveilled, which sucks. Like that's awful too. But then this like because this is the accountability metric, the way that they're surveilling you, um, it also becomes mandatory that you work in a particular way using particular applications. It takes away a lot of freedom that people have at their work to do their job the way that they're comfortable doing it, which has been the biggest downside. Like just to gripe about teaching for a little bit, this has been the worst part of moving to online teaching is like I don't get to teach or use the tools that I'm comfortable using. And change can be good, but at the same time, like it's still a pain. And there's been a lot of loss of academic freedom in that. And I think that it's important for people to have, creative out like external to my own opinions about like labor and the relationship of the worker to their job. Like people should have like some degree of freedom in the way that they execute the tasks that they're given at work. Unless you're like in the military or like the merchant marines and people's lives literally depend on you doing your job a particular way.
okay.
Like this is a way for managers to manage not only to further manage your behavior at work.
More importantly, it's a tool for managers to now fire whoever they want.
Yeah, well, they
Right?
could
Like,
already.
no, but I mean, like that their higher ups wouldn't want them to.
That's fair.
Right? Like if I'm Eric's boss and I just don't like Eric because Eric's some crazy commie, um, and I want to fire Eric, I just like start logging every time Eric turns on, you know, Firefox and goes to his Facebook page. And I bust him a couple times for that. Eric fixes that behavior because he's not stupid. But I've already written him up once, right? So now I just got to write him up two more times to give him that pink slip so that I can get him out the door because I just don't like Eric. Now, granted, they can do that already, but it's so much harder for them to do that now than it would be if they literally could just log onto a computer at the end of the day and see what you did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because if you're looking for a reason to get rid of somebody, you easily could with this sort
Oh
of
yeah,
software.
yeah. It's not. It's not
Well,
hard.
there's a lead we're leaving out. It's not like companies get this data and it sits there. This is also giving that productivity data to the company that owns it, which would be Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So now Microsoft would be tracking huge number of corporate data sources, and they'd be able to access and see exact modalities in which individuals work. Right?
And
So
they can sell that off to competitors.
correct. They also can sell to advertising agencies when the best time to run ads are for people who they are attempting to access at work. Right? If right after lunch might be the time in which I'm most likely to go, check the Facebook real quick, right? Or go, Amazon shop for a few minutes, right? If granted, they probably know these, but what if it's a specific time, right? What if you're attempting to access a particular type of worker, right? And that marketing data can be better. So when they do those sorts of things, right, they're tracking you more and more individually. And the more and more individually that they can track us and they can link us to one another and they can create conglomerated groups, the more aggressive and problematic their algorithms become towards us. Right. So another thing that I wanted to point out to people that is a little bit different is the new Google tracking IDs on all Google searches. So used to be, we're used to the really long Google, like if you search something in Google, like a Google image, and then you send me the Google link, it's a super long link that redirects. You know what I'm talking about, Eric?
Mm-hmm.
There's now new tracking lines within that, which basically what they do is if I take a picture on my screen and I send it to Eric, Eric opens it on his using my link. It creates a new link for Eric that is not the same as mine, new tracking information, but that link pre-tracks that link came from another link.
And then they can connect which link it went to, so they can create large webs of data
They
and
create
how
webs of who's sending images to one another, right? So let's say, the new whatever comes out, right? Like, I don't know, the new headset comes out and I go, Eric, check these out. We should get these for the podcast, right? We could have matching headsets. It'd be super cool. We'd be like cute and stuff, right? And then Eric sends it to somebody like, hey, check these out. What do you think of these headphones? And that person sends it to somebody. Well, I may have gotten the link from somebody else. Now we're in this giant web, and we've all experienced it on Facebook, and now all we get is headphone ads. But more problematic than that, right, is what happens when it's I send Eric a Jacobin article, right? And we have the next fascist president of the United States, and he's more fascist than the previous one, right? And they start cracking down on anybody who has any kind of leftist ideas, right? And all of a sudden, they use me and Eric because we have a public space to speak about these sorts of things. And anyone who's ever grabbed one of our links on a Jacobin article or grabbed one of our links on a socialist workers article, right, or something like that, right, now has been linked into a web. Oh, you watched our podcast one time, so now you're in that web as well. So now you're under an extra layer of scrutiny and surveillance that other individuals. These sorts of things are real concerns. Even more importantly, we're talking about America. What about other countries? Right? If you're in a country where there is actually a dictatorship that is actually trying to end free speech, right? And one of those persons logs on and watches our episode, and we talk about ills of capitalism and how bad it is, and that they get linked that metadata, and that country buys that metadata.
Yeah, these companies are not. These companies, despite their love of free market capitalism and freedom and liberty in the American way, they actually don't give a shit who they do business with. They'll sell this data to the highest bidder because it's a profit. Like profit over everything else, always.
And so you end up with a situation where those webs and those intricate webs in relationships, one, lie, right? Just because you watch me and Eric talk about the ills of capitalism doesn't make you not a capitalist, right? Like, it doesn't make us not capitalists, honestly. Like, talking about something and doing something are two very different things, right? But simultaneously, right, it creates targeting mechanisms for bad actors to access, right? Whether those bad actors are, Russian disinformation and Chinese disinformation and Iranian disinformation campaigns, they're targeting particular groups of people to try to incite violence, right? Like, let's say you sent a birther meme to somebody, and that has a Google tracker on it, and now that Google tracker gets the entire birther movement. Now they can send very particular packets of information to try to incite violence, right? These are actual goals of foreign entities in the United States. But in other countries, it's a completely different game that's even more devastating and destructive if their governments want to access that data, because they do and they will and they have.
And it's it's those countries, it's this country's intelligence agencies, it's whoever is buying the data. They really don't care. And that's the most concerning part.
All right. So Google hates us.
Yeah. I have told Nick about a film that I would like to watch, or I have yet to find a platform that it is hosted on, but it is a film called Possessor, and the film deals with themes of sort of like the disillusion itself among data webs and the and sort of like the interfaces, the way that we interface with technology in the modern era. Think like Videodrome, but updated for 2020.
And what is it called?
It is called Possessor. It's directed by Brendan Cronenberg, and it stars some smaller actors who are in a lot of like horror and sci-fi movies. It stars Andrea Riseborough, Christopher Abbott, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Ross of Sutherland.
I apparently can't spell dilemma.
It looks very trippy.
Looks very trippy.
Yeah.
Oh, there's two M's in. Interesting.
Why are you trying to spell dilemma?
Because I'm going to give my suggestion. I just added those both onto our screen. So his suggestion is to watch the video or the movie. Eric, movie?
Yeah, it's a movie. It's
movie Possessor. And if you have Netflix, I suggest you watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix. That is a mind-blowing thing. Makes you rethink the way that we look at social media and social media context. It also is going to harp on a lot of themes that I've been harping on for the past couple of weeks about data, metadata sharing, the way that intelligence communities use this, and the way that businesses use it, and why it is problematic. But I wanted to make sure that we got that out there. So those are two videos that or movies and or videos and or documentaries that we think you should watch.
Oh, I pitched this before as well, but I don't think we've put it up on there. It's called Hypernormalization. It's a documentary film that was on the BBC by a guy named, I believe, Andrew Douglas. It was very good. It deals with themes of sort of financialization and as sort of we have begun to rely on data to try to predict and eliminate threats before they can happen. We now no longer live in a sort of real reality. We have this fake reality of data for a world that either doesn't exist or could never exist. It's a very good documentary.
Awesome. So I think that's it. We'll see y'all next week about 7 p.m. Hopefully we'll start at 7 p.m. next week.
Yeah, sorry for being late, y'all.
And have a great week.